So I've always had a interest in the preservation of endangered languages, having a healthy community of speakers who teach their children the language and, they're using that language on a day-to-day basis. I guess when I was a little kid, I had a very visceral reaction when I first learned about residential schools in Canada and, their policies and behaviors against the indigenous languages. They would routinely beat kids in these schools when they were speaking their indigenous languages, like Cree, for example. And so then they had a fear of speaking them because it was associated with being physically assaulted. Anyway, the Canadian government used these residential schools as as a tool, as a method to get rid of those languages. But eventually I learned that, endangered languages is a global phenomenon. Every continent has dozens and dozens and dozens of endangered languages, for multitudes of reasons. There's tons of different reasons for why a language becomes endangered. Policies, the cultural side, policies of Canada is one reason, but there are other reasons too. Anyway, I see the loss of a language as tragic. I see it as a loss of a big chunk of a community's identity and culture, the cultural knowledge, certain pedagogies, epistemology, worldviews, So when LLMs, large language models, first came out, these are the things that chatbots use. So when you're talking to ChatGPT, this is an LLM. So I thought damn, this shit's gonna be the savior for endangered languages. I fantasized many hours, about being able to build fucking LLMs myself for hundreds of different endangered languages, I envisioned these as tools that could help people learn how to speak them, right? Not just chatbots, although the chatbot aspect is probably the most important one, where you talk back and forth with something that can actually have what seems like an intelligent conversation, a real conversation. But even envisioning that these systems could explain the syntax, the morphology, the phonological rules, the phonetic descriptions, all the stuff that makes a language. And if you typed a grammatical error, it would be able to explain to you why it's an error. It could teach you to not make that error again. This is how I envisioned it all. I guess part of that fantasy came from my own experience. When I was younger, 19, 20, I was studying a language called Guarani, which is an indigenous language of primarily Paraguay, but also spoken in bordering states in Argentina and Brazil. And the amount of resources online was absolutely abysmal. It's I spent way too much energy and effort looking for resources that I could actually study from. Imagine that, right? It's instead of all of your cognitive effort going into studying the damn language itself, now you have to use all this effort to find resources because there weren't many out there. I remember being 19, full of this desire. I just remember that desire always being fucking roadblocked by the fact that I had exhausted all the resources I had, and these resources didn't even go that deep. And I have all this desire to want to fucking read a grammar textbook, and I couldn't find any. There was nothing, right? So eventually I stopped. So this idea of sort of democratizing access, to learning any language, giving people the perfect tools, zero effort to find these tools. And that to me, in my mind, it felt epic. But the thing is, LLMs are just a tool, right? As they say, just because a hammer can frame a house, it can also break someone's fucking bones. So, just to give a bit of background for those who don't know how LLMs, large language models, learn languages, right? So the basic, and I'm not an expert in this, right? But the basic understanding that I have of it is that basically they're just reading a bunch of text in that language and they're learning the statistical patterns. So things like collocation, this word appears here and this word appears after it, when this word appears after it and this word appears after it and this word is 10 words before it. It can get very, very complicated, right? But they're just learning how to guess the next word or phrase, based off of the entire context. So like we can start with a simple example here, right? So if I say to you, I'm out of bread, I'm going to go to, where am I going to go to? Right? There's a few places I could go to, right? I could go to the store, I could go to a bakery. It's basically places I can get bread, right? I wouldn't be like, oh, I'm out of bread, I'm going to go to the basketball court. That would be incoherent, right? So the context basically gives us, the broader the slimmer, the more specific the context is, the more detailed the context is, it gives us less options of what it could be, right? We rule out things. Another example, it's sunny outside, I'm going to go to, where am I going? Again, there's a good amount of places I could go. I could go to the park, I could go to the beach, and I could go to the basketball court. There's more places I could go. But, if it's sunny outside, you could also say under a tree to get shade, inside. But also knowing who that person is might predict it better. Like if someone hates the sun, then they might be inside. But like if someone's from like, a place where it's very cloudy, like Ireland, it's more likely they're going to be doing something outside. But there's a lot of context that kind of goes into predicting. Like as human beings, right, we also have social context. We know things about this person. The AI isn't going to know that. But anyway, so as I said earlier, the more context we add to something, the more narrow our list of following words might be. So if I expand that context, and if I say it's sunny outside, a good day for swimming, I'm going to go to, okay, now I'm not going to the basketball court, I'm not going to the park, I might be going to the beach, I might be going to the pool, I might be going to the lake, so there's more context here, right? So that's all an LLM is doing, right? It's using the context to make guesses, and the thing is, these LLMs can take in an absurd amount of context. I mean, so can we, right? We can also take in a ton of context and predict what people are going to say, but LLMs, they're not just taking in 2 sentences of context. Like they can be taking in basically everything you've said prior as context. That's why you reset the conversation, right? That's why, if you go too long, sometimes the conversations start saying weird things related to the things you were talking about earlier. Like if your conversation shifts topics broadly, the original context oftentimes is going to influence the new things being said, which is why sometimes you want to click that new conversation button. Okay, so that's just the basic background on how LLMs kind of work. Okay, so now what happens if the data that the AI is learning from, that the LLM is learning from, is bad data? Like what if it's bad grammar, fake vocabulary, poorly translated sentences? Then how is that LLM going to speak, right? If it's learning English from books people wrote, right? We know that those books are good grammar, real words. The content is coherent. But if it wasn't, what would happen? It wouldn't be able to predict beach anymore, or park anymore, or grocery store anymore, because the context wouldn't be coherent. There'd be fake words, mistranslated words, and the grammar would be wrong. So it wouldn't even output it in a way that makes sense. Words would be in different orders, the morphology would be wrong, because if the patterns it learns don't reflect reality, the output is not going to reflect reality. The output is going to reflect the patterns that it learns, and the patterns that it learns are whatever is in the data. So if the data doesn't reflect reality, the output is not going to reflect reality either. Alright, so let's talk about the linguistic doom loop, as is coined in this article. There's this dude in this article named Kenneth Ware, and he's always had this hobby of writing Wikipedia articles in his native language. I guess since he was a kid, right? He liked writing articles in Wikipedia, right? It's sort of a hobby a lot of people have. And he went and he visited Greenland as a teenager, and he became enamored by the culture, the language, and all that stuff. So he ends up studying Greenlandic, the language of Greenland, in university, and then he takes his hobby of, writing Wikipedia articles in German, and he takes that hobby to Greenlandic and starts writing articles in Greenlandic. But the first thing he had to do was delete basically everything he saw and read on the Greenlandic Wikipedia. So it's like, you might look, there's 1,500 articles in Greenlandic on Wikipedia. That's solid, right? Like, okay, there's hope. Greenlandic isn't really an endangered language, but you look at 1,500 articles, you'd be like, this is pretty healthy. Like, if I wanted to learn Greenlandic, like, this would be a good resource for me. Like, Wikipedia, 1,500 articles, tens of thousands of words. That's impressive. That's awesome. What a resource. The thing is, it's a mirage. So let's get into that. So, this Kenneth guy, speculates that there's only 2 Greenlanders who have ever actually contributed to this Wikipedia, to these 1,500 Wikipedia articles, right? Most of it, he says, was copy and pasted into Wikipedia by machine translation. And the article says, riddled with elementary mistakes, grammatical blunders to meaningless words to even, significant semantic inaccuracies. They give an example. One entry claimed Canada only had 41 inhabitants. So, why is this a problem? Other than the fact that if you want to use Wikipedia as a resource to learn Greenlandic, that it's not going to suffice. Why is this a bigger problem, right? Well, Wikipedia has a big role in training a lot of these large language models for endangered languages or languages with just a smaller number of speakers, right? Again, Greenlandic has about between 50 and 60,000 speakers. So it's actually a pretty healthy population, but even the problems I'm about to explain affect a language with a healthy population of speakers. Like a lot of these endangered languages have, 20 speakers, 200 speakers, let alone, 60,000. So, quote from the articles, Wikipedia is sometimes the largest source of online linguistic data for languages with few speakers. So any errors on those pages, grammatical or otherwise, can poison the wells that AI is expected to draw from. That can make the model's translation of these languages particularly error-prone, which creates sort of a linguistic doom loop as people continue to add more and more poorly translated Wikipedia pages using these tools, and AI models continue to train from poorly translated pages. It's a complicated problem, but it boils down to a simple concept: garbage in, garbage out. So basically, it's learning from its own output. Because if it's learning from Wikipedia, and Wikipedia articles are created by using the LLMs model that exists, it's just learning from itself. And have you guys ever seen you ever seen those images where people I asked AI to recreate this image 50 times. You've seen those, and you see how the image changes, and comparing the first image to the last image, the 50th image, they're drastically different. All right. So if a language model is being trained by its own output, what do we expect to happen? Here's some more quotes from the article. In 2020, Wikipedia was estimated to make up more than half the training data that was fed into AI models, translating some languages spoken by millions across Africa, including Malagasy, Yoruba, and Shona. Here's some more quotes. Volunteers working on 4 African languages estimated that between 40 and 60% of articles in their Wikipedia editions were uncorrected machine translations. And then the same can be said about 2/3 of pages on the Inuktitut Wikipedia. 2/3 of articles are uncorrected machine translations. Here's another quote. This guy is, I think he's a farmer in the Sahel, and he routinely edits the Wikipedia pages in his native language, Fulfulde, and he says on the Wikipedia for Fulfulde, probably 60% of articles are uncorrected machine translations. Here's another example, right? So this lady, an Igbo speaker, which again, this Igbo is spoken by millions and millions of people. This Igbo is not an endangered language at all. It still succumbs to these problems of the linguistic doom loop, right? So she says the harm has already been done. She opened the 2 most recently created articles in Igbo, and both were automatically translated by Wikipedia's Content Translate. So this is a tool that Wikipedia has, Content Translate. Wikipedia's Content Translate. Remember that term just for a couple minutes, because I'm going to mention it again briefly, right? So she said they contain so many mistakes that it would have given her a headache to keep reading them. She says this one even includes letters that are not used in the Igbo language. She also said she recognized the username, and this person is a serial offender. This person's a serial offender. We'll get into why people do this. Well, at least what the article says at the end of the video. But so let's go to another example, right? Another quote, So the assistant professor of the Hawaiian language at the University of Hawaii reports that 35% of words on some pages in the Hawaiian Wikipedia are incomprehensible. Here's another example, right? They're just non-stop. Error-strewn AI-generated books aimed at language learners, as diverse as books for Inuktitut and Cree or Manx. Many of these books have been popping up for sale on Amazon, and a linguist at the University of Quebec says it was just complete nonsense about an introductory phrase book for Inuktitut. So people are selling books online for language learners made by AI, and they're nonsense. I'm going to reference this in a bit again, because remember I told you to remember Content Translate, right? So Content Translate will basically just automatically translate an article from one language to another, keeping the citations and all that stuff, right? Now, each language's community on Wikipedia has the option to either accept or decline content translation, meaning, you can say, hey, for articles in our language, we don't want articles to come about from content translation, right? And it makes sense. I mean, you've seen the examples I've given in this video so far, right? Now, but here's the hammer on the anvil. I don't even know. I can't think of the right idioms right now. The mic drop type shit, right? So, quote from the article: notably, English language Wikipedia has largely banned its use, claiming that about 95% of articles created using Content Translate failed to meet an acceptable standard without significant additional work. And why is this a mic drop? Because English is the most dataful language on the internet, as far as I know. At least it's up there, right? You'd think if any language could thrive with Content Translate, it would be English. Yet, still, the English Wikipedia community does not accept Content Translate because 95% of the articles using it do not meet their standards. So, how good is this tool going to be for Greenlandic or Inuktitut or Yoruba? And then what happens when the AI system learning Yoruba, Greenlandic, or Inuktitut is using its output to train it more? Pretty big shit, eh? Now, going back to, remember I started this video talking about AI, LLMs as my original envision of them was this fantasy, like, damn, like this could be a paradigm shift and game changer for endangered language learning and preservation. Could get communities being able to speak the languages again in accessible, efficient, sufficient ways. But here's some quotes, right, from the article, right? So, going back to that professor from the University of Quebec, talking about the phrase books, the bullshit phrase books for Inuktitut, right? He says, or the article says, rather than making minority languages more accessible, AI is now creating an ever-expanding minefield for students and speakers of those languages to navigate. It's a slap in the face, the professor says. He worries that younger generations in Canada, hoping to learn languages in communities that have fought uphill battles against discrimination to pass on their heritage, might turn to online tools such as ChatGPT or phrase books on Amazon and simply make matters worse. It is fraud, he says. Right? And that's the thing. It's like, it'd be cool if they could turn to ChatGPT and it be that fantasy type source that I imagined, that fantasy type resource that I imagined it could be, a couple years ago. But that's not reality today. Going back to that, the Yoruba speaking lady, she says that the results of these Wikipedia articles can have the exact opposite effect, pushing users away. She says, you will be discouraged and you will no longer want to visit this place. You will just abandon it and go back to the English Wikipedia. Remember, she was talking about she couldn't finish reading those 2 articles because it gave her a headache, all the nonsense in it. But I can imagine myself being 19 and 20 again, right, studying Guarani and learning that, right, like one of the resources I had been studying from, like imagine I got this fucking grammar book akin to that Inuktitut phrase book that was generated by AI. So I got this grammar book, it's generated by AI, and I learned 2 months later that it's nonsense. I can imagine myself just quitting, just being done with the language entirely, being so fucking discouraged and disenchanted. Imagine investing 2 months into studying something and it's wrong. Like, it's not just that you have to spend 2 months to learn the right stuff. It's that you have to unlearn. Like, when it's a language, when you're learning a language, you learn things and you cement them into your mind. They become habits. So you have to unlearn them. Like, I bite my nails, right? You got to unlearn that shit. Okay? In that same sense, if you learn a language and you learn it incorrectly, this is a big problem, by the way. I could make a whole video on this with like problems in ESL paradigms, in certain countries. They teach people things the wrong way. Because when I was an ESL teacher, I had to unlearn things for people, and that was harder than teaching them. So you had to unlearn them and teach them. So it's like 2 things into one, right? So it's like, not only if I'm my 19, 20-year-old self again in 2026, in a AI strewn world where it's garbage content, garbage in, garbage out, right? It's like, not only do I have to deal with a lack of resources that I explained earlier in the video, I have to deal with false resources now too. Holy fuck. How discouraging is that? Lack of resources was discouraging enough. Now you're telling me there's false resources. I can't imagine. Alright, so I thought one of the interesting things the article talked about, it's not really central to this video, but I thought it would be interesting to just provide, because some people are going to be wondering, like, why are there the so-called serial offenders? So here's some quotes from the article, just some examples from the article, right? So one Canadian teacher in his 20s says that, he used to use a mix of Google Translate and ChatGPT to translate articles from English into Inuktitut because he thought he was pitching in and helping a smaller Wikipedia community, right? He thought, he was doing something good, He thought someone might see it and fix up the errors. Like, he knew that the translations weren't perfect, but, he didn't know how bad they actually were and that they were being used as training data, making the output even worse in the future. So, he would make these articles, right? And no one would edit them. They just stay as he put them. So he emphasizes, he had good intentions, and now he's saying, I'm thinking it may have been a bad idea. I did not consider that I could be contributing to a recursive loop. He says it was about trying to get content out there out of curiosity and for fun without properly thinking about the consequences, right? And I think most people don't realize this, right? And then another quotes from the article. These are quotes from someone who has studied the behavior of users on smaller Wikipedia editions, different smaller languages on Wikipedia. He says AI has empowered a subset that he terms Wikipedia hijackers. These can range from naive teenagers creating pages about their hometowns or their favorite YouTubers to well-meaning Wikipedians who think that by creating articles in minority languages, they are in some way helping those communities. So it's like people don't think they're doing anything bad here. They have good intentions, but just the way AI is, the places the AI is taking the data from is the same places where they're putting these bad translations into. Again, creating those recursive loops of shitty output, learning from the shitty output, right? After reading this article, I read this article months ago, but it makes me think of, I want to spitball solutions here. So it's like, we know that LLMs do work or can work. They can be proficient speakers of languages, right? Like I speak to LLMs in English and in Spanish, and they are fucking good. They don't make mistakes. Like I often will use voice to text and get LLMs to add in the proper punctuation and substitute misheard words, and it does it. It always basically gets it right. The voice to text can hear some shit wrong. I've been doing voice to text for like 3 to 5 minutes, so it's long, and it'll substitute all the correct words in, and you could try it yourself. You could just type in some bad grammar in English, use the wrong words on purpose, and then just ask ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever to fix the grammar and all that stuff, and it will output the correct grammar and it will use the correct words, right? Because they work because they had good data, right? There's an abundance of English data. It works pretty good. So if we idealize what these AI chatbots could do, right? They could learn languages and how they sound and how these sounds are used, They could build good translators, good dictionaries, and be excellent chatbots. They could understand the grammar and be able to explain the grammar. They could keep these languages alive digitally. And again, just be accessible tools for people who want to learn them, mainly community members. And eventually, if you get a healthy language community going, you wouldn't need the AI chatbot anymore. But the case for a lot of language communities is they don't have a healthy number of speakers and transmission to the younger generations, right? But a lot of people want to learn their ethnic background's language, but the resources aren't abundant. There's nowhere for them to practice it, so it's hard. And LLMs could serve its purpose, I think. But I don't really know. I mean, I've never learned a language with LLMs, but I might do it as an experiment. I might learn like French or German or something with just LLMs, just to see like how it works. And then, hey, I'm going to study it for 6 months just with LLMs. That's all I'm going to use. And then, we'll see like what German speakers think or something. That's the potential idea, but I don't really know if I want to put effort into doing that right now. But it would be an interesting study to see like if LLMs can be LLMs on their own could be a good source, right? In reality, your LLM wouldn't be your only source, but it would be interesting to see, how if LLMs can create competent speakers for languages that LLMs have, competent data for. Again, French, German, Spanish, English. Anyway, so we already know LLMs are being made with whatever data is available, right? So it's like Greenlandic LLM is already being made. So someone's already paying for this. It doesn't seem, I don't know, maybe I'm being naive here, but it doesn't seem like funding would be an issue for any LLM, for any language, no matter how small. they're just being made with bad data, right? So I think when we talk about solutions to this problem, I think number one is like the discernment for data is so important. Like you have to get rid of the bad data, right? If the training material is full of errors and fake words and just grammar, non-native grammar, like the model's going to learn those patterns and reproduce them, and we don't want this. It's like more data isn't better, right? We need quality, not quantity, and it seems like right now it's going on a quantity over quality model, right? Again, bad data in, bad language out. I'm gonna hit you guys with one more quote from the article. All right, so going back to the Greenlandic, the German guy who learned Greenlandic, Thomas Ware. So he says, there's nobody in Greenland who is interested in this project, the Greenland Wikipedia, or who wants to contribute. There is no point in it, and that is why it should be closed. I guess it would have been in 2024, he made a request that the Wikipedia Language Committee should shut down the Greenlandic Language Edition. And eventually, it says Ware's proposal was accepted. Greenlandic Wikipedia is set to be shuttered. Among the reasons cited by the Language Committee is the use of AI tools which have frequently produced nonsense that could misrepresent the language. If the data that exists is shit, you still need quantity of data, right? You want quality data, you need quantity though. Because if you don't have the right quantity, you just don't have enough data to output, not enough patterns to learn from. How do we create that good data? One thing I've thought of, maybe this is not a good idea, maybe it wouldn't work because there wouldn't be interest, but I don't think encyclopedic writing is ideal data, period, because it doesn't reflect natural speech, conversational rhythm. A huge part of language is discourse markers. It doesn't use discourse markers, it has different syntax. The frequency of vocabulary is different. Encyclopedic language has a different frequency of common vocabulary. It doesn't really take into account the cultural nuance, or, like, I'm not saying encyclopedic data is bad data, but if the goal is to help people speak a language in conversation and not write formal articles, then relying on encyclopedic text is not ideal. So it's like when you see that these models' data, they're like relying, more than 50% of their data comes just from Wikipedia. That's just Wikipedia. That 80-90% of their data, 100% of their data might come from formal articles in total, right? So I think we need to create, we need to be able to get data from casual conversations, authentic conversations, right? Like if a community or a company or a linguist, computer programmer, wanted to create a really solid LLM for an endangered language, I believe the data should come from things like Reddit-style forums and Discord-style voice chats. Because when you look at like a Reddit-style platform, people are talking about whatever they want in casual, everyday language, right? And also way more text is going to be generated from daily chit-chat than formal articles. I mean, not only is it more accurate data, and accurate I mean like reflecting how people speak, it's going to be way more abundant because anyone can chime in on a discussion about something going on. Could you write more informal articles or perspectives, experiences, opinions, stories within the confines of discussion, right? Way more potential data. And the same thing from like Discord style voice chats. There'd just be people talking about things and AI would analyze it, the phonology, the phonetics, all that type of stuff. Obviously there's like two ethical considerations. I mean, first of all, it's like you have to verify that the contributors are native speakers or proficient speakers, and it's like, well, how do you do that, right? It's like, well, I think it should be community-led, obviously. I mean, it's going to be a community project, right? A linguist shouldn't impose anything, right? They should offer ideas, but not control. Like if a community wants to build a solid LLM for their language, it should be up to them, which advice they take from the linguist, and the computer programmers. Like they might want a linguist to confirm speaker ability, or they might say, we have native speakers in our community and they're going to decide who speaks it fluently, I mean, you might even have a system where like there's tags, so like anyone can go on the website, learners and native speakers, but you have a tag, you know, like this is a native speaker, this is someone who's learning, this is someone who's an L2 but proficient, and then the AI model could take into account how it wants to use and analyze that data. And then obviously, like, again, it would be a community-driven thing, right? So it would be their choice, you know, their voluntarily choice to participate in these voice chats or these forums, knowing that it's taking what they're saying, it's recording their voice, it's taking what they type and using that to build a large language model. Anyway, I don't know. I'm just spitballing ideas for solutions to combat this AI garbage in, garbage out thing, because, I mean, I don't know how this would play out in reality, but I feel like we cannot deny the power and potential of large language models for learning languages and teaching languages and preserving languages, you know, and documenting languages. Like, there's so much potential in this tool. I mean, historically, you have like language grammar books, you know, like a linguistic grammar. You know, I'm not talking about like a grammar book that you learn a language from, but like a grammar and linguistics is like this, you know, 500, 600, 700, 800 page document of just, you know, technical jargon about the grammar of the language, the phonology of the language, right? You know, they tend to not have a lot of conversation in there, and they tend not to have comprehensive dictionaries, and definitely not dictionaries that, you know, are very comprehensive, you know, with certain collocations and all the different, you know, polysemes and shit, you know. But anyways, there's just so much potential there, but the way that it's going about now for most languages is bad. So that's just a spitballed solution from me. I don't really know how it would play out. Anyway, that's all I got to say on this for now. Hopefully this video was informative and interesting and stuff like that. If you have any solutions to this as well, type below. And by solutions, I'm really interested in ideas that use these LLMs, because I think it's just such a powerful tool of what it could be. And it is a part of our life now. I don't think there's any way to get rid of it. Not even that you should want to get rid of it for this context, right? That's a whole different discussion. But it just needs to be guided properly, because it can't just learn from itself. It can't be in this recursive doom loop. It needs to learn from high quality data, and we need to figure out ways to generate and gather high quality data.